I'm happy to welcome Dr. Richard Koestner. Dr. Koestner is a professor of psychology at McGill University. He did his PhD at the University of Rochester. He did a post-doctoral fellowship at Harvard. He has dedicated more than 30 years of research to studying personality and human motivation. He is the founder and director of the McGill Human Motivation Lab, and he has published over 200 scientific articles. Dr. Koestner recently won the Canadian Psychology Association's Donald O. Hebb Award for distinguished contributions to psychology as a science. In 2007, Dr. Koestner received the Canadian Psychological Association Award for Excellence in Teaching. And in 2008, he won the Principal's Prize for Excellence in Teaching at McGill. Dr. Koestner is one of the world-leading proponents of self-determination theory, and his recent work focuses on how to effectively set and pursue personal goals. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. Koestner.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay, Jen?
Yeah, you sound
Yes.
great.
Oh, great. Okay. I'm excited to talk to all of you. I'm a motivation researcher. I focus on goal setting, and usually I'm invited to give this talk in early January because I mostly talk about New Year's resolutions, and that's the time of the year that many of us are oriented towards setting new goals. However, one of the things I've learned in the 30 years that I've studied goals is that that is probably the worst time to try to set a new goal, because at least in Montreal, January is a very difficult month where it's icy, it's snowy, there's so many things to worry about. I'm guessing it's pretty similar in BC. And I have a new idea that I'll tell you about at the end of this lecture, which is I think we should reset our New Year's goals right around now. I recommend Canada Day, which is July 1st, as a much better time to give your New Year's resolutions another shot. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about 3 secrets to improving your goal setting and to improving your well-being. And I know that you are a brain wellness group, and my guess is that being successful at reaching your goals almost always will result in more positive affect, less negative affect. And my guess is it's having some good brain effects as well. We recently did a study where we showed that university students who are making progress on their goals have much lower levels of cortisol that accumulates in their hair follicles. That's a place you could measure accumulated stress hormones. So I think there are some links between goal setting, well-being, brain function. I'm not really a neuropsychologist. In fact, I'm nowhere near as a neuropsychologist, but I think some of the work I do can link with other research that's going on. Okay, so when I tell people I'm a motivation researcher, I play a lot of golf and I do other activities. And invariably, when you meet a new person, they'll ask you, what do you do? And so I say, I'm a motivation researcher. The first thing people say is, well, that sounds kind of interesting. And then the second thing they say is motivation. I can use some of that. Sometimes they'll say, my son can use some of that. Sometimes they'll say, my grandson can use some of that. Almost never do they say that their daughter or granddaughter can use some of that. But there's a sense that many of us have that motivation's a good thing, it's an interesting thing, but we're lacking. And I think when we think about our lives, we often feel they would be a little fuller, they would be a little better if we just had more drive, more focus, more energy, and if we could just apply ourselves more. So I think most of us have a feeling like, our abilities are pretty solid and our heart is in the right place, but we just can't keep after it. We can't stay with it as much as we would like to. So invariably, we wonder, where can I find more motivation? Now, I actually think we all know what to do when we're lacking motivation. It's something we learn at a young age, and it's something that we use many times throughout our lives. And that is, when we're looking for motivation, we set a goal. A goal is a cognitive representation of something we want to attain. So oddly enough, a goal that came up for me in the last month or so is I want to start doing yoga. So I was excited to see that your program has a yoga class next week. Uh, and uh, and my wanting to do yoga is because, I'm a middle-aged guy, and I know that I can see that my physique is kind of changing from being like an apple to being like a pear. And I have a colleague who's been doing yoga for 10 years, and I had lunch with him the other day, and he looks like an action hero. He looks like one of these TV actors who totally remodeled himself. And he did it by like yoga, which I would have never guessed. So, okay, so I have an idea of I'd like to do yoga. And then the question is, will I actually be able to follow through on this new goal or this resolution? Unfortunately, I'm a person who's been setting New Year's resolutions for 40 years, and I keep track of whether I succeed or fail. And like many of us, my sense is I'm pretty much doomed to failure. So I'll show you my resolutions from last year. I set 3 resolutions, which is probably too many. That's one of the things you'll learn. Last year, my first resolution was to learn to play ultimate frisbee. This was kind of a shared goal because my daughter was finishing high school and she wanted to play a university sport. She once said, "There's no point to going to university if I can't play a varsity sport." And I explained 95% of the students at university don't play a varsity sport. She said, "But I got to." And she had been a badminton player, but she realized she's not going to make it at university in badminton. So for some reason, we decided ultimate frisbee's got to be pretty easy. So for a year, we were practicing uh, throwing a frisbee with the forehand, the backhand, throwing with our offhand so that we could do it ambidextrously. So we were working at frisbee. The second goal I had was to stop giving my cats as many treats as I had been giving them. This is a picture of my 2 cats. You might notice they're kind of chunky, kind of chubby, and there's some risks when pets eat too much. So I said, okay, I'm not going to be as soft as usual. And when they start doing their cute stuff to get me to give them treats, I was going to resist. And finally, my last goal was I was going to take walks at least once a week with my wife. So how did I do? I did pretty much like I always do. Ultimate frisbee, in a way, we developed some skills. I kind of wish we were in person so I could show you how well I could throw a frisbee. But unfortunately, we never actually played a game of ultimate frisbee because in Montreal, we could never find a place where there was a group of people playing ultimate frisbee and where we could play it like it's intended to play. So when my daughter tried out for the ultimate frisbee team, she was like cut almost immediately because she didn't know how to move. She didn't know the formations. It's a well-developed team sport, and we hadn't really prepared at all. My cats, unfortunately, I wasn't able to reduce the treats. They're a little bit bigger than you see in that picture. And the most embarrassing of all my goals was taking a walk with my wife every week. I actually immediately forgot that I had set that goal. And I didn't even remember until the next January when I look at my previous year's goals because I'm going to be teaching. So total failure across the board. Now, Most of you, if you failed at all three of your resolutions, you would feel bad. I no longer feel bad because I think failing at goals is to some extent normative. Now, how can I say that? I can say that because people have done research on it. There's a really well done study 25 years ago where they followed up a large sample of adults from January 1st, 6 months into the new year. Everyone had to have a specific measurable goal. And what they looked at was when people said, I failed. Amazingly, after 1 week, a quarter of the people said, I failed already. I'm out. I'm done. I'm not going to try this anymore. At the end of a month, about a half of the people say they failed. And it progressively more and more people fail. So that, the highest estimate you could get is maybe 10% of people are able to keep their New Year's resolutions. And contrary to what you might think, New Year's resolutions aren't frivolous. Their New Year's resolutions represent a self-change attempt, usually about our health. So the three most common resolutions in North America are, number one, to quit smoking. We'd all be a lot better off if we could quit smoking. The number two is to eat healthier and eat in moderation. And the number three is to exercise more. And I'm a big believer in exercise. It's a miracle drug, exercise. It has many of the same effects as other medications we might be taking to improve our physical and psychological well-being. So people are failing, and this is meaningful because they're failing at things that could make their lives better. That could make their health better, it could make their brain health better, it could make their relationships better. Now, why do we fail? There's a theory of self-control or self-regulation failure, which suggests that to succeed, we have to have three ingredients in place. So if you're going to succeed at following through on a goal and sticking with it and managing to shield your goal from all of the interruptions and distractions, the first thing you need to do is you need to have very clear and specific standards. You have to know exactly the behaviors that you want to start enacting. Okay, so you need clear, specific standards. I'm going to show you some examples of university students' goals, and you'll see that very rarely are they clear and specific. They're usually pretty ambiguous. The next thing you need to do, and it's kind of contingent on having clear standards, is you have to monitor your behavior early on to assess whether you're coming close, whether you're undershooting, or whether you're maybe even overshooting these standards that you set. So you want specific, clear goals. You want to be monitoring your behavior. And then the final ingredient that I'm going to highlight a little bit later, the final ingredient is you need some willpower, or you need some self-control strength. And modern motivation research suggests we could think of self-control as a limited resource. Think of it as having a reservoir of self-control within yourself, and your reservoir might be larger than my reservoir, and mine might be larger than another person. So someone who's very conscientious has a higher reservoir of self-control. But for each of us, there's a limit to our capacity. And if we are trying to exercise self-control in many areas of our lives, it's quite possible we will reach our limit and we will be maxed out. I'm guessing you probably had some days that were very busy and where you had to exercise a lot of self-control. And by like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you realized it's all gone. I'm not going to be able to do anything that requires willpower and self-control the rest of the day because I've reached my limit. So uh, I should have defined self-control. What self-control refers to is the ability to alter or override your typical way of responding. So here in Montreal, it's now about 4:15. This is a time when I get a snack attack. Since I've been 15 years old, in the late afternoon, I first start thinking about, boy, I need something salty. And then I'll go get some potato chips or pretzels. And then after that, I think, okay, now I need something sweet. So I'll get some chocolate. And I know it's not a healthy habit. So I have set the goal of snack less or snack differently. But in order to do that, I first have to inhibit my typical habitual way of acting. I have to shut off the bodily cues I'm getting, which are saying, you usually give me a snack, Richard. You usually give me a snack. Where's my snack? When's my snack coming? And I have to override that and do something else. That's self-control. And if you ever tried not to snack when you've been snacking for a long time, you know it's a hard thing to do. Okay. So there's 3 ingredients: specific goals, monitoring, and then you need some self-control resources. What you may have heard about before, if an organizational or a sports psychologist talked to you about goals, is there's something called SMART goals. And SMART goals, the SMART is an acronym. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, and by achievable, they mean something under your control. So a goal like having a better relationship with your mom, that actually might not be under your control. Your mom might be a real pill. She might be a very difficult person to get along with. So you have to judge whether it's achievable. Realistic has to do with uh, whether it's something that you could uh, realistically be able to do. It shouldn't be too difficult. So I once set a goal of doing an Olympic triathlon. I was 40 years old. An Olympic triathlon is much shorter than like an Ironman triathlon. An Ironman triathlon, you end up doing a marathon at the end of it. That's crazy for someone like me. So it should be realistic. And then the last thing, it should be time framed. So you should have a notion of like when you want to do various sub goals on your way to the. So SMART goals is what you'll be taught. I'm going to show you that I think SMART goals are insufficient and they're probably missing the most important thing. So here are some examples, which I get from when I first taught my motivation class at McGill. I asked everyone January 3rd what their resolutions were. About half the students had resolutions. And the ones I'm choosing here are pretty typical of how university students write resolutions. And we also followed these people up at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months to see how successful they were. So the parentheses next to the top 2 resolutions were their success rates. You'll see that just like me, they fail, just like you, just like all of us. So this first person, I name her Pam Beasley from Pam in the Office, which was one of my favorite shows. She's a really nice, sweet, good-natured person. And I think I'm sort of similar in how I set my goals. I set a lot of goals. I set idealistic goals, and I don't pay attention to the fact that it's not likely that I could pursue 5 goals at the same time, especially 5 goals that will be competing for my limited self-control resources. So she says she's going to do volunteer work. She's going to keep up with schoolwork. She's going to be a nicer person. She's going to write home more often. She's going to write more good books. There's no way you could possibly do those 5 things. You'll also notice there's very little specificity. What does keeping up with schoolwork mean? For me in university, what that meant was I had to review my notes at the end of each day and at the end of each month, each week. And then at least once a month, I had to link my class notes with my readings. That was keeping up with schoolwork to me, but I had to learn that. Be a nicer person. What does that mean? Read more good books. What's a good book? So that's the classic problem. We're not specific enough, and you can't really measure your behavior if you're not specific. So she failed. Pam failed. Here's Elaine, inspired from Seinfeld. You could see that the 1990s and the 2000s were my peak in TV attachment. And her 3 goals were to do really well this semester with an exclamation point. And then her second one was get over my ex-boyfriend once and for all. And that was, you'll see that she only got 10%. And then I love the last one, to not be so neurotic, because you could see based on the first 2, she's pretty neurotic. Now, again, do really well this semester. It's not specific. Get over my ex-boyfriend once and for all. What does that mean? You're going to stop looking at social media so you could see what he's up to. You're going to stop talking to your friends so much about him. You're going to stop walking around his block every day. What does getting over my ex-boyfriend mean? It has to be more specific. So there was failure on these goals because they weren't specific, and there were too many of them, and they were in conflict. Now, here's another person I'll call Clarissa. I don't know why I chose that name, but here's a person who sets perfect resolutions. You could not craft a better resolution than Clarissa comes up with. She only has 2. 2 is probably the right number for New Year's. And the first is to drink 8 glasses of water a day. Very specific, very clear. Exercise 3 or 4 times per week. Again, specific, clear. And you would think these 2 might even go together. If you're exercising a lot, you'll drink a lot of water, whatever. So nicely done. Good work, Clarissa. The only problem is Clarissa failed, just like Pam and just like Elaine. So failure at these New Year's resolutions seem to be normative. And I think I know why. And this is really what I want to share with you. I think the focus on setting specific, measurable, achievable goals, it's well-intentioned. It maybe makes a little bit of difference, but it doesn't get at the heart of our problem with motivation and with goals. And the heart of the problem is that those 3 ingredients I told you about aren't equally important. So the first ingredient is to have clear, specific standards. The second is to monitor your behavior. The third is to make sure you have self-control resources. My sense is that that third ingredient is like 50 times more important than the other 2. In fact, I think that when we set a goal, we should face the fact that it's going to be really difficult to achieve it. And the reason it's difficult is because we may not have the self-control resources that are required to inhibit your typical behavior and substitute a new behavior. And the reason we don't have those self-control resources is that our lives are so motivationally complex. We have so many different tasks, so many different responsibilities. We have email that's bombarding us with new things all the time. And I think most of us have reached our max. We're at the highest level possible in terms of using the self-control resources that we have. And each time you set a new goal, you have to find additional self-control resources. Otherwise, your other goals will start falling apart. So I think the challenge for all of us is how to sneak around the limitation in self-control resources. And so the secrets I'll tell you are ways to stay beneath our maximum level of self-control. usage in a day, let's say. Now, the first secret I'll tell you about, which is endorsed by every motivation researcher I work with, this is empirically validated. It's not something that I developed, although I use it in my research. It has to do with making your goal pursuit something that's automatic, something that you don't have to think about, you don't have to work through. It just becomes kind of an instant habit. Now, let me give you an example. So, 20 years ago, I took an intensive French class because one of my goals that I repeatedly make is to learn French. And, I can understand it, I could read it, but I still can't speak it conversationally. So I was trying to learn French, and in the first week of the course, all of us were told we had to do a 10-minute expose, a little speech about some topic. So I picked New Year's resolutions because I always make resolutions and I had read some about it. So I gave a talk in French about New Year's resolutions, and I used the example of drinking water. That year, one of my goals was to drink more water because I was dehydrated most of the time. And so I said, okay, I'm going to drink 8 glasses of water a day. So I gave my expose. The students clapped, but it wasn't such a good presentation. And the teacher said, okay, let's have a pause now. And she had a break. And everyone dispersed. But 5 minutes later, there was a student in the class named Gwen who came back with a fresh bottle of water. And she said, voilà une solution pour votre problème. And I said, je ne comprends pas. Pourquoi est-ce que vous me donnez une bouteille d'eau? And then she said, maybe we should just talk English, which we weren't supposed to do during the breaks. But then she explained, Richard, you have a goal of drinking water, but you don't have a plan that will make that goal something that's automatic. And she said, I learned something that I can share with you, which is if you want to drink 8 glasses of water today, you should fill up a water bottle, a clear water bottle in the morning, and carry it with you and take it to your workstation. And you put it right in front of you. So it's a visual cue. And you'd say to yourself, if I'm going to the bathroom, I take my water bottle with me and refill it. If I'm going to the mailroom, I refill it. If I'm at my workstation, I'll drink some water every half hour or so. So she gave me this implementation plan, and I've never had a problem drinking water since she told me that 20 years ago. It was like a miracle. It was something that I could integrate into my lifestyle, and it became an automatic habit. And one of the things that Peter Gollwitzer, who is the motivational researcher who discovered this secret and who's done a lot of research on it, he points out that having a goal is only the first step, and there's a second step that has to come with it. A goal is just a wish or a desire. You also need a plan for how you're going to do the behaviors required to reach that goal. And he thinks making a plan involves sitting down for 5 minutes and thinking about when, where, and how are you going to do the behaviors related to that goal. And the best thing to do is to find a when, where, and how that makes things kind of automatic. I'll give you 2 examples. In both Montreal newspapers, about 20 years ago, they featured success stories about fitness goals. And they highlighted that some people are able to follow through. And they asked those people who were able to do that to write about it. And when I looked over the 20 examples in the French newspaper, the 20 examples in the English newspaper, at least 3/4 included some mention of what I would consider an implementation plan. So this is from the Montreal Gazette, and this lady says, the fact that I've been so successful in my exercise regimen is thanks to my simple routine. Everything is prepared, packed, and set next to the front door the night before. I have my workout clothes there, the gym bag, the work stuff, the lunch. The coffee machine is set to brew. Frozen bagels are placed in the oven. Basically, nothing is left to chance. The less I have to think about, the better. This is a very obsessive lady. Many of us would not choose this particular implementation plan, but she's onto something. The less we have to think about when pursuing the goal, the better. The more it's a simple routine, the better. It makes it automatic. And that means we don't have to wrestle with when, where, and how we're going to do it. Here's another example from La Presse. And in this one, there's an administrative assistant who's been wanting to get in better shape. And what she decides to do is in her agenda, this is from the year 2000. So that's when people at work used to still have an agenda where 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you would say what you were going to do. Now we do it on our phone. But what this lady decided to do is that 2 evenings a week, always at the same time, she would do her exercise. And she would write it in her agenda, so she would be reminded all the time. And here she says it made it like an automatisma. It made it an automatic thing. Instead of thinking about, okay, when am I going to exercise this day, this week? She knew it's always going to be Tuesday, Thursday night from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. The other thing she did, she said, I respected my exercise times the same way I would respect an important business meeting. So for her, the way to make it automatic was to put it in her agenda and to treat that goal the same way she treats her work goals. There's now been over 200 studies where they look at an implementation plan versus no plan, and they find that implementation plans greatly help us in reaching our goals. Okay, so the first secret is to make your goals automatic by coming up with a good implementation plan. Now, the second secret I'm going to tell you about is much closer related to my own research. And one of the things I learned when I looked at New Year's resolutions, we asked people why they set them. And a lot of people set New Year's resolutions for what seemed like the wrong reasons. So what we have found is that it's surprising how few people are choosing resolutions that are interesting or personally meaningful or in some way reflect something that they really care about personally, even though it's a personal goal. Instead, a lot of us are setting goals related to what we think others want us to do or what we think we should be doing or that we have to be doing. So in the research I've done, I distinguish between wanting to do something because it's interesting and meaningful, we call that autonomous, versus feeling like you have to do something because others want you to do it or because you'd feel guilty if you didn't do it. So it's wanting to versus having to. It's I get to do this versus I got to do this. And I think the best way of capturing it is there's some goals where you feel wholehearted about them, where you feel like I fully commit myself to doing this. But that's relatively rare. Lots of times we feel conflicted and we feel pressured. And what the research suggests is if you feel conflicted and pressured, you're going to have to exert a lot of self-control just pushing yourself to do this stupid goal. Whereas if the goal is interesting and if the goal is personally meaningful, you don't have to push yourself at all. It's easy to remember the goal and to find the effort. It feels natural. It's almost like it's a flow activity. So what we do in longitudinal studies with university students, with older adults, with patients who are in psychotherapy, is we look at the goals they have, we ask them their reasons, and we distinguish whether it's more about autonomy or it's more about control. And here are some examples. Are you doing this goal because it's interesting, fun, and enjoyable? Because you think it's important and meaningful? Those are all wholehearted autonomous reasons. Or are you doing it because someone else wants you to, or you'd feel guilty? Now, I've personally done about 50 studies looking at this distinction, and we consistently find that people who have more autonomous goals make much more progress. People who have controlled goals, they flail away and they make hardly any progress at all. So you want to be selecting goals that are interesting and personally meaningful. When I look at the goals that I failed at many, many times, they're mostly goals that I felt controlled about, that I felt pressured to do or guilty about. When I look at the few goals, few net resolutions where I succeeded, I was able to find something that was interesting and meaningful, and that made it so much easier. Okay, so the first two secrets are find an implementation plan, try to select autonomous goals. The last secret is that our goals, even though we set them and we pursue them, they're actually interpersonal, and that we often rely on other people to help us think through our goals, to help us get started, to help us stick with it. In fact, motivation researchers now say that we actually have to outsource some of the demands of goal pursuit to our friends, so that by being an extroverted person who tells people about your interests and goals, you're actually bringing other people in to support you as you're trying to do these various goals. Now, what I've done is I distinguish two ways of receiving support or giving support. The classic way we think about support is to be a cheerleader, or which I would define as providing positive guidance and encouragement. And, that's a very obvious way to be supportive. And I think that's kind of our default way. There's another more quiet, almost invisible way of being support. And that is when you don't really direct the other person. You don't even cheerlead or evaluate. You just show interest. And you also display empathy as someone tells you about their struggles or their successes. So I would suggest there's actually two ways of being supportive. And the research that I've done and other people have replicated suggests that the second way is the helpful way, the more invisible, quiet support, where you show interest and you try not to jump in and problem solve and hold people accountable and encourage people. Now, I'll give you an example of how not to give goal support. My wife, 10 years ago, she decided she was going to start running as exercise because our daughter was old enough now and she wanted to get back in shape. My wife is a very careful, deliberate person. She found a 10-week running program where every week she'd run like 3 times, but it would be 1 minute of running, 2 minutes of walking. You'd repeat that 7 times. Then you do 2 minutes running, 2 minutes walking, and so on. And it changes every workout. And my wife told me this. I said, that's too complicated. No one could possibly do something as careful and deliberate like that. Why don't you just get on the treadmill and run for 20 minutes? And she said, no, I don't want to hurt myself. This is how I want to do it. And she made some progress, but after 4 weeks, she had a cold, and she said she was going to take a week off. And I said, oh, and then when you come back, you're going to go to the next week, week 6, right? She said, no, I'm going to start over because that's what you have to do with this program. And I said, oh, no, you can't start over. You can never go back. You have to be like a shark that's like moving forward all the time. And my wife didn't really run after that. She still hasn't run. And what I was doing was being very directive, probably even more than directive, probably controlling. But the way to respond is, oh, I could see that you want to do it this way. You like when things are predictable and there's a structure. And I should have just accepted the way she wanted to do things instead of giving my own advice. So here are some of the items we ask people. Does the person who's supporting your goal remind you of your goals? Do they help you problem solve? That's directive. Or do they listen? Do they understand? Do they accept? And what we found is that when you're receiving more autonomy support, you make better goal progress. You also have better well-being. So you have more positive affect, more life satisfaction, and there's better relationship satisfaction when you're sharing your goal with someone who's more autonomous. Okay, so I think we're almost done. Oh boy, yes. So how can we improve our chances of overcoming the self-control limitations to succeed at our personal goals? I gave you 3 tricks. All 3 of these ideas have been well supported by dozens of studies. The first thing is, with a goal, you need an implementation plan, something that makes it into more of an automatic habit. Second thing is, you should select goals that are interesting and meaningful to you. When they're autonomous like that, there won't be this resistance, and you will just more naturally find it easy to be doing the things related to this goal. And finally, the last thing is, you should find people in your life who support your pursuit of the goal in the more invisible, quiet way. Beware of people who want to jump in and tell you how you should do it, like I did with my wife and her running. So you want to be autonomous in selecting your goals, and you want to find people who support that autonomy. Now, the final thing I'll say is that I think now July is the ideal time to set a goal. Our lives are usually a little easier, a little calmer. Here in Montreal, it's sunnier. In BC, I don't know if you ever get the sun out there, but I have found that setting a goal or resetting a goal in July is it's a time when I can select more autonomous goals. It's a time when I could come up with better implementation plans. It's a time when I usually have more progress. Okay, so I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing. And if you have any questions, I know it's been a long day for you, so, but please do ask any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koestner, for that wonderful talk. I know that every participant in our program has very individualized goals, so I think learning how to create effective and sustainable goals, it can go a very long way. So as he said, if you have any questions for Dr. Koestner, please feel free to type them in the chat. If you have any questions about our summer program or anything that I went over earlier, feel free to put that in the chat as well. I think we have a few minutes to address everything. So we have one question here. Dr. Koestner, do you have any ideas on how to rebound from when you fail to meet a goal?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And they've actually studied how people feel. And most people are disappointed when they fail at a goal, and their self-esteem takes a bit of a hit. But it's really helpful for people to realize that most goals that we'll succeed at, we have to try a number of times. So there's a stage theory of change, and there's an idea that we have to cycle through And so most people who succeed at a resolution of quitting smoking, it's usually like the 8th or 9th time before they succeed. But the interesting thing is most of us will tell you that we learned something from trying, even when we fail. Now, the person who asked that question, I want to remind you that I think failure at goals is normative. Don't feel like there's anything wrong or strange if you're failing at your goals. The research suggests uh, it's kind of a modern condition because our lives are so busy and crazy and there's so many responsibilities. Uh, However, I would focus on the things I talked about, like choosing an interesting goal. Like I'll give you an example. My mom is 89 years old and she's pretty fit, but my sister has found something that she was willing to try. She was reluctant but willing to try, and she started doing Tai Chi. And she does Tai Chi with a group of 15 others. And at first, all she did was she whined about it. She said, "It's so slow. It's so slow. I can't move so slow. I don't want to move so slow." It's now 3 weeks later because my sister listened to her, and my sister is like autonomous. She's the gentlest, kindest person. And she said, "I see you're frustrated, Mom, and I can understand that, but maybe, you stick with it a little bit longer and it will be okay." Now my mom loves Tai Chi and it's just like 3 or 4 weeks later. And I think in that case, it was the fact that she could talk to my sister about how strange it felt and how my sister could provide the support she needed to stay with it. Uh, and now that she's tried Tai Chi, maybe she'll try something else. So I think other people can help us when we feel like failures. I'm hoping I can help you by telling you that it's normative to fail and that all of us fail many times, but it's still worth trying again soon. And we've probably learned something from that previous failure.
Thank you. We also have a question here that says, how can we set household chores as goals and be successful?
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the first part of that? How can we?
Suggestions on setting household chores as
Oh,
goals
household goals.
and being successful.
Yeah. That's a good one because I highlight doing things that are interesting and fun, and household chores do not fit that definition. Now, I have found a way of doing household chores that works for me. Uh, about 20 years ago, I realized I wasn't reading books recreationally. I wasn't reading books for fun anymore like I used to when I was younger. So I started getting audiobooks, and now I have audible.com. And for the last 6 weeks, I've been going through all of the Jack Reacher mystery detective books, which are incredible. And what I find is I am very happy to mop, to clean up, to do my laundry, to pretty much do anything. I moved into a place where there's a balcony and there's all kind of pigeon poop out there. But I put my air my earbuds on and I have my Jack Reacher book, and I'll be out there for an hour and a half cleaning. And so if it's a really drudgery kind of thing, I think some distraction while you're doing it can be helpful. Now, my sister actually likes cleaning and she's an organized person and she feels good about cleaning, and she can do cleaning without distracting herself. But so sometimes I think it's, okay, what's my implementation plan? I have to clean. How am I going to make it so that I'm ready to do it and I don't mind it? Some people put on music. I like recorded books better. Anyone else in this group who's found a way of making cleaning something that you do regularly, please let us all know, because this would be really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely also find that like listening to music is nice. We just have a couple minutes. There's one question I think is very important though.
Yes.
Someone asked if you have any suggestions for sorry. So the person who's asking this question, they
Yes, I
are
see that question
representing,
about
yeah,
a neurological disorder.
yeah.
And I think
So
that's an excellent question, so that, uh, yeah, any of us who have physical pain disorders or neurological disorders, it makes it harder to pursue our goals regularly because there's a lot of suffering. Uh, uh, and sometimes all you can do is, you know, wait until that passes. Now, uh, I'll be honest, I think the rest of the team here may know more about this, but there is a psychological element to most pain disorders. And I think having a good implementation plan that also relates to how to manage pain and how to get back to your goals is a useful thing. So actually, when you make an implementation plan, they ask you to specify where, when, and how, let's say you'll do your exercise each day or your Tai Chi each day. The other thing they do in more advanced implementation plans, they say, well, what if something goes wrong? What's the most likely thing that could go wrong for you personally? And if I had, let's say, rheumatoid arthritis and I had difficulty with my joints, I might say, well, there's some days I can't even move my fingers. And then the, the motivational psychologist would say, okay, is there any plan that can help you recover from that or to get past that? Or is it an alternate activity when you can't move your hands? I of course, I'm kind of giving you directive support here. And probably the first thing I should have done is empathize with, how difficult and frustrating that is. But I do think, thinking about implementation plans, thinking about support uh, can be helpful. Uh, the I have worked with some people who I worked with a doctor who works with young people who have diabetes. And with diabetes, there's a lot of self-management. But what's really frustrating is even if you do everything correctly, there's some randomness to how the disease works. And you could be monitoring your glucose and eating the right things and exercising the right time, and still you won't be able to do something when you want to do it. And that can make you feel helpless and discouraged. And I think this is a really good question. I wish I knew a little bit more about what to do with these kinds of difficulties. But I do think it's something where if we got together and talked about it, we could find a way to adapt a little bit.
yeah, thank you so much. So I think we went a little bit over.
Sorry
Apologies for
about that.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much again, Dr. Koestner. And thank you everyone for joining us for today's event. Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah. And it was nice meeting all of you. And if you have any questions, please, I'm at McGill University. It's richard.kestner@mcgill.ca. I always welcome questions, and I'm a pretty good emailer. I set a goal of responding to every email I get from people I've given talks to. And good luck with your goals. Please do try to set a July goal. It's a good time to do it, and you have a chance to actually be more successful than usual. So I'll say goodbye then.